Coming up, the New York Football Giants are preparing for the Dallas Cowboys. What do the numbers tell us for the trenches? Offensive and defensive fronts for Big Blue have certainly taken a seismic step forward this season. Can they take on the Dallas Cowboys and pull themselves into what is, oddly enough, a somewhat wide open NFC picture? We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and of course, talking about the New York Football Giants continuing to approach that Thursday Night Football short turnaround against the Dallas Cowboys. Andy, we're going to talk about the line, talk about the injury updates, which are not great for Big Blue right now, and whether or not we think that there are some trends from the Dallas side that make this a gettable game. But how are we, sir, on a Tuesday? Chose not to show up yesterday. I thought that was a bold statement by you as it relates to the podcast.
You know, I was at a charity gathering, Adam.
Sure.
Just giving back to children.
Having your parents cook you dinner for you and your family is not charity, even if you feel like you are receiving something you need.
Listen, I know that you're not a charitable guy, but I just support good causes, and so unfortunately, I couldn't be there. But I will say, it did feel great waking up Monday morning after a Giants victory. It feels like we haven't felt that in quite a while, and so for me, waking up to a New York Giants W. Thank you for holding down the fort yesterday. And listen, now we get to think about are the Giants still in this? Are the Giants a relevant team again? After 2 weeks,
we'll have that conversation once we get to Thursday Night Football and see how it plays out. Obviously, we're going to talk about the NFC as a whole here, coming off of Monday Night Football, where Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders certainly look like a strong offensive team. Although we ask questions about the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe too, which is there's a lot of learning going on over the first 3 weeks of the NFL season, and I think it's going to continue into week number 4. But as we turn our attention to the Dallas Cowboys, it is now a road game for Dallas, and yet the Giants at home will be getting 4.5 points on Thursday Night Football. Was there any movement on that line from where it started immediately? Because on short weeks, it's a lot harder to see a big shift there, even marginally, when it comes to where the money's been laid.
Yeah, Adam, you mentioned 4.5 was what the opening line is. It's already started trending. People are betting Dallas considerably right now. There are some books that it's moved up to 5. Others have even moved it up to 5.5. 66% of all of the wagers are currently going in on Dallas, which is one of the highest across the NFL. And so for me, everyone still has no faith in the Giants and still believes the Cowboys and their potent offense is still an overwhelming favorite, almost a touchdown favorite on the road on a short week coming to MetLife Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you go back and you think about the game against the Baltimore Ravens, and on the one hand, Dallas gets absolutely dominated, but then they also came back. And I think what this is going to come down to when we think about Thursday night, it's still going to be what is the confidence level for us in the Giants offense that based on the opponents that we've seen them take in the first 3 weeks. Can they do what Baltimore did and put up points early? Because the big narrative around Dallas, I think, is when they're playing from in front, when they're playing from ahead, that's a different opponent than when you get out, you force them to chase the game a little bit. And for a defense, as we're going to talk about with injury updates here, that is going to be struggling still in the secondary, certainly, you need to think that you can go out there and put some points up early. Don't maybe muff a kickoff and have it get returned, have it go immediately for a 7 on a quick touchdown from Deshaun Watson, right? Those are the things I think the Giants are going to need to do a better job of playing some error-free football. But the other thing they're going to have to do is figure out how to bandage together this secondary, because already coming out here, care of Dan Duggan, not looking good for cornerback Drew Phillips with his calf. He left the game against the Browns, or Adoree Jackson with his calf, who also left the game against the Browns for Thursday night. But Daboll said he doesn't think either will go on IR. I didn't take that as a silver lining because I didn't realize that it was on the table that these guys might need to go on IR. He hopes the cornerback Nick McLeod, who has missed the past 2 games with a knee injury, will return for Thursday, which would obviously be a big boost for this defensive unit. Even though it's been a mixed bag with the results, listen, I talked about yesterday Deonte Banks and the state of his game right now. Even though the defense, we're going to talk about the numbers for this defensive front too here, is played well against Cleveland. It's just this ragtag bandage together secondary that this is where I start and say, well, it's going to be hard for the Giants to come and just dominate the offensive weapons of the Dallas Cowboys like CeeDee Lamb when you just don't know who's going to be on the field for them right now.
Well, Adam, what you were talking about before when Brian Dable came out and said, "Oh, I don't think they're going to go on IR," and you're like, "Huh?
It's like,
I didn't even know that was an option." It's like if your significant other was like, "Adam, I just for the record, I am not moving to Japan." You'd be like, well, "I didn't even know that Japan was on the table," right? Like,
we're having a discussion, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I'm curious to hear what the actual situation is. So I had the same reaction as you. I didn't even realize that the severity of those injuries meant it was kind of a week to week thing, and they were kind of debating whether or not IR could be an option. I think you're absolutely right, though. The secondary, even when healthy, has been questionable and suspect. And now we have guys like Drew Phillips that are out, Adoree Jackson. We keep getting thinner and thinner, and we know that the strong part of the Dallas Cowboys is their offense. It is a huge concern for us that they want to score and they want to pass the ball through the air. Not having that secondary and not having all available resources to you is going to be a big problem, especially on a short week, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the other footnote here, Lawrence Cager going to IR as well. Didn't get a good this past week sample size back for him, which you may think is insignificant, but it's kind of significant because they haven't really had a lot of production out of that position. So Daniel Bellinger just livid that he got his catch taken away against the Browns, but they're still searching for answers as Theo Johnson tries to develop into a larger role. So another bad footnote there. But to your point, it's just what the injuries do to games on a week-to-week basis really does matter. And right now, I guess if you were going to take losses, having it come at a position where the Giants coming into the season weren't overly confident to begin with, okay. Like, I'd rather it be there than Brian Burns or Kayvon Thibodeau or Dexter Lawrence or Azeez Ojulari, who, by the way, yes, I threw incredible shade at you live last night on the podcast because he came up in a big way against the Cleveland Browns in a couple of key moments. Like, if you're going to take it away from somewhere, take it away from a spot that's already a weakness and we think we're going to struggle in. Don't take it away from a place in this past game that showed up, I think, for the first time in a big way this season. So, silver lining, we don't have to worry about that. One other thing I want to note here before we turn over to the trenches and some of these key stats for both sides of this football game. Brian Dable also confirmed that Greg Joseph is going to remain the kicker for the New York Football Giants. I just wanted to touch base on this. He missed a 48-yarder.
But did he? Yeah. But did he? Because Pat Leonard came out at him and said, so just to confirm, Greg Joseph is your kicker on Thursday night. And Brian Dable said, I never said that. And so, like,
well, Dan Duggan confirmed that Joseph will be the kicker on Thursday night. So, so I don't know. So who knows which way we're supposed to go here? We have to go to the tail of the Twitter timeline tape. At what point do you have Pat Leonard confirming that and having Brian Dable say that he didn't say that? Because I got 29 minutes ago. Dable confirmed Joseph will be the kicker for Thursday.
Okay, so that might have been Pat Leonard's question from before that, but the fact that Brian Dable didn't actually come out and just outright say it on Monday is perplexing to me. But Adam, the other thing, side note is, if they were to go with another kicker, they can't release Greg Joseph yet because he was activated and claimed off of someone else's practice squad. He has to stay for a minimum of 3 games on the active roster. So the Giants would have had to keep Greg Joseph on the active roster for 2 more games, but then elevate and activate another kicker. And we know that the Giants are allergic to having 2 kickers on the active roster, even if one has a pulled groin going into the game. So yes, it is encouraging at least that he's saying, all right, we're going to go with Greg Joseph, and he's making the announcement. But yeah, the kicking game is still an issue, Adam, whether it's guys that are dinged up like Graham Gano who aren't going to be available, or guys like off the street Greg Joseph who's missing field goals in critical moments. It's not, I'm not sitting here thinking that I have all the confidence in the world in our kicking game right now, and I'm sure you don't either.
No, I mean, listen, from an extra point standpoint, sure, right? If you want to go back to last year, by the way, Greg Joseph is only 30 years old. For some reason, I thought he was 38 or 39 and just one of these aged veterans. He was on the street prior to being brought in by the New York Football Giants. If you go back to last season, before we move on here, inside of 40 yards, he was a perfect 16 for 16 last season with the Minnesota Vikings. But guess what? That kick that he had on Sunday from 48, well, between 40 and 49 yards, he's only 50%, 3 of 6 a year ago. From 50 plus, he's only 4 of 7. So it's the distance that's going to be a problem here for Greg Joseph more than likely. And it does make you question a little bit, maybe the decision-making process for Brian Dable on Sunday when you just signed him. But after a week where you didn't have any kicker, I think you wanted to take that chance. We'll see how the Giants approach as you get into that field goal range. If it's 40 to 45, 46 yards, I don't know if they're not going to say, what's the down and distance? And do we feel like we need to treat this as 4-down territory, even early in a game, especially against a good offensive team? Coming back here, though, if I could, I've been really bringing the juice lately, and I think you need to bring up your energy for us in this next segment, Andrew. Let's talk about the offensive line, because there are some grades from Sharp Football Analytics that tell you this is going in the right direction. To go along with the eye test, to go along with some key performances in these first 3 games, do we think that the Giants' offensive line can be a needle mover when it comes to Thursday Night Football? We'll dive into that in just one moment. Okay, Andy. Let's turn our attention to the offensive line for the New York Football Giants. I mentioned their care of Sharp Football Analytics. Now, this only technically counts through the first 2 weeks, although sample size by and large has been pretty consistent for this team. You can go by PFF grades. Some guys have struggled a little bit more or less. We would obviously see a dip in some of these numbers because Andrew Thomas struggled with a very difficult assignment in Myles Garrett in week 3. But when we go inside the pass block win rate through the first 2 weeks of this season, Andy, the New York Football Giants came in there as a top 10 team, 65%. And if I'm not mistaken, this number may have been updated since I was last looking at it. They have been top 10 in pass block win rate. The pressure percentage has actually been among one of the higher level in terms of pressure being brought onto the offensive line. So blitz packages being brought. Sack pressure percentage has also been a key category. So they 40%, which is the sixth highest, in the NFL over these first few games of the season, to go along with 22.4% sack/pressure percentage. They've also been blitzed on 22% of the offensive reps that they've seen. All this to say, the Giants are winning at a pretty successful percentage. They're living inside of the top 10, and they're doing it while opposing defenses are trying to rattle them and are willing to take some of those risks to bring a little bit of extra pressure for an offensive line that we think improved this offseason, but is still gelling in these early days.
You know, Adam, when you say that, I think 3 things, and I want you to
Wow.
tell me which
That's a
one
lot of
is
thoughts.
of interest to you most. The first
Sure.
is eye test. The eye test tells you that this
Yes.
offensive line has been playing better than it has in previous seasons. I think we've all watched it and said, whatever the numbers yield, they at least look like a competent offensive line. That's number 1. Number 2, you have Devin Singletary rushing the ball at 4.7 yards per carry. He's averaged 4.6 in his career, so he's right on that exact number. The fact that they're able to adequately run the ball opens things up a little bit where they can't just pin their ears back and just go after Daniel Jones. And the third piece of it is having a wide receiver like Malik Neighbors that catches almost everything that's thrown his way
Mm-hmm.
also makes it so that the defense can't just sit back and say, we're going to stop the run no matter what. We're going to force Daniel Jones to throw. Those 3 things combined, I kind of look at it and I say, the offensive line is improved, but the run game is better than Saquon Barkley's 3.9 yards per carry. And you have a number 1 wide receiver who can take heat off them too.
I swear to God, if you say Saquon Barkley one more time on this podcast, it's over. He's not here anymore. We're not comparing Saquon Barkley to Devin Singletary.
No,
One other key
it's just
stat.
about the
I don't
rushing
care. We're
yards.
gonna talk about the run game in a second here. You can bring it back up in a second if you want to. First, I just want to tell everybody that also one other key stat, time to sack. And first of all, the blitz percentage, just to clarify, it's actually 19th in the league. So it is closer to middle of the pack or a little behind. Offensive line still holding up strong. Time to sack, however, for the New York Football Giants offensive line, it's been among the better in the league here. Now, the elites are the 49ers, the Broncos, actually, even in front of their rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, but still a 3.68 seconds time to sack for the New York Football Giants. That's going to keep them just outside of the top 10, top 12 in the league overall right now. If we turn it over, Andrew, and talk about the run blocking win rate, this is where it's a little bit more interesting. Why? Because the New York Football Giants in this particular category actually find themselves in 5th position, 77%. The yards before contact per run for the New York Football Giants is actually a little bit lower on the list. And then we think about a couple other things like yards after contact per run. That hasn't been as high. And then you also have the stuff percentage where the offensive line is doing their work to open up those holes. The Giants are not particularly strong, bottom third in that category on just 14%. And the reason why I bring this up, and you can go ahead and touch back on the running game here as well, is that remember, it was one monster run by Devin Singletary against the Cleveland Browns where he could have scored the touchdown and then just sat himself down so they could take a knee. Without that, that was a disastrous running day for this running back room. Tyrone Tracy Jr. did a little bit of work for himself in a handful of carries and mostly through the passing game, but it has not been a stellar running game performance so far. Offensive line has held up, but it's been a little bit mix and match in terms of which offensive linemen have been successful and the ability for defenses to actually shut it down. Cleveland did a very good job against the running game for the Giants by and large on Sunday.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting stat, that the fact that the run game outside of that long run wasn't as successful, but Cleveland is also one of the best defenses
Of
in the
course.
league historically, right? And so, like, it's a chicken or the egg thing. Yes, the explosive plays are not what Devin Singletary is actually known for. So seeing him break off a long 40-yard run is super encouraging for the Giants. But yes, they need
Okay,
to be
and
able.
just to clarify, though, that's super encouraging. It was a really important run in that moment of the game. But Devin Singletary on Sunday against a good defensive front for the Cleveland Browns, he had 16 carries for 65 yards. You take away the 43-yard run, which isn't the way stats work, but this isn't dissimilar to when you would talk about Saquon Barkley, home run hitter. You take that away, he had 15 carries for only 21 yards. Like, it was an absolute disaster. And if not for Tyrone Tracy Jr. and his 5 for 23 and 8 carries for Daniel Jones for a modest 20 yards, only a couple of scrambles there, it would have been a really shutdown day for that offensive unit and for the run game, who, again, at that point, you're selling out if you're Cleveland. It's the moment where you have to go all out for this to either shut it down and give yourself a chance or not.
It is funny how it works. I mean, just from the window dressing and the aesthetics of it, it's like if Devin Singletary didn't fall into the end zone, or like if he decided to fall into the end zone, he would have a 2-touchdown day with a 40-something yard run and everyone would be cheering it. But it's like if he didn't have that one run, he would have had 20 yards on 16 carries. And like, to your point, so it's like, it's crazy how that one play shifts the perception of where the Giants are. I mean, overall, I think Devin Singletary has shown he's going to go and try to take the tough yards for the Giants, which I think is important. This team is just not built to play from 3rd and 13 or 3rd and 12. And so while his yards per carry weren't great against the Browns, I don't think a lot of people are scoring very well against the Browns in the rushing attack. And so for me, I kind of look at it more, the defense of Cleveland dictated that more than I have concerns about the Giants run game in general.
No, certainly. And overall, the unit has been solid. And really what we're talking about in both of these categories is that the Giants offensive line has improved. They are better this year than they were a year ago. The offseason moves have ultimately worked out for them. Now, you're still going to have, I think, Illuminor ideally is playing out of position for this team, if we're just being 100% honest about their intentions. And I think John Runyon Jr., who missed almost all of the offseason and the training camp with his injuries around the shoulder, that's taken time to get back in there. What I also have pointed out repeatedly week over week, because it keeps being true, all 5 of the Giants starting offensive linemen have played 100% of the snaps every single week. That is not something we've ever been able to say in the last decade. And going forward here, if those guys can stay healthy, you can also project, hey, no matter what the competition is, there's going to be games you win or lose. There's going to be really difficult matchups. But the continuity that you can develop if you keep having the same 5 players in the same 5 positions, damn it, then it leads to success for that unit. So it's really encouraging. That's why big, point stop. It's been incredibly encouraging what this team has been able to do over the first 3 weeks.
First, you need to knock on wood, because you cannot, whatever you got in the area, knock on it, because yes, the Giants have been fortunately very healthy across the offensive line, where last year they were not good, and they were also injured quite a bit. But my only question for you about the offensive line is, it's like a chicken or the egg thing. Do you think that Malik Neighbors being there as a number 1 wide receiver has made the offensive line look better, or do you think the offensive line has played better, so it has allowed Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors to be able to get into a little bit of a rhythm? Like, I'm curious which one's the cause and which one's the effect. Where's your head on that?
We talked about I talked about this a little bit coming out of the Cleveland game, where in the second half we know that they end up having Ward shadow Malik Neighbors a lot more, so his day is a lot quieter in the second half. Of course it does. Having a number 1 wideout just means that defenses and secondaries have to account for him that much more. We saw that you're still looking around. Wan'Dale Robinson had his best game of the season so far, had that high catch percentage we talk about, but that's because you start to open those opportunities up, because you start to pay more attention to Malik Neighbors. So 100%, it forces safeties to stay back off the line a little bit. You're a little bit more worried about over-the-top help. Giants haven't had deep plays down the field yet to this point of the season. That's probably by defensive design from the opposition in a lot of instances. So yes, I think it is a both and, not chicken or egg. Although somebody did tell me this, that there were dinosaur eggs. Like, that's what dinosaurs were. They came out of eggs. So obviously eggs came first. So there's really no debate about chicken or the egg. The eggs came first.
Who laid the eggs, Adam? Who laid
But
the eggs?
eggs are, chickens are dinosaurs, but chickens weren't the first dinosaurs. They're descendants of dinosaurs, and the egg was there. So if we're debating chicken, egg, or chicken, it has to be the egg came before the chicken. Don't get
I love
derailed
this.
here, Andy. Don't
People
get derailed.
People come to the OGP podcast to hear you talk about chicken and dinosaur eggs. I
Yes.
did not have that on my bingo card for our Tuesday show. I'll tell you that.
I think the Giants made improvements to their offensive line this offseason, and drafting a number one wide receiver has also helped it, right? It's why when you mention the name that need not be mentioned in SB, Saquon Barkley, it's like we can't compare these things because what would it have looked like if the Giants at any point over his tenure as a New York Giant decided to actually fix the offensive line for himself, for the quarterback, for the franchise overall? Coming up here in a second, though, let's flip it over. Let's talk about the defensive side of things. Obviously, it was a monster day for the defensive unit against the Cleveland Browns. How much of that is repeatable against the Dallas Cowboys? How much of this can we get excited about for Big Blue? And what does it mean as this Thursday night game approaches? And certainly NFC. Let's take a little spin because it is a wide open landscape 3 weeks through the season. We'll get there in just one moment. Andy, let's talk about New York Football Giants defense. When we look at what the Giants were able to do against the Cleveland Browns on Sunday, obviously it is incredibly encouraging. There's no two ways about it. Now, I did temper this when we look and, remember that this is an offensive line that had injuries coming in and then suffered injuries in the game as well. But overall, through 3 weeks of the season, as Jordan Renan provided these stats, Brian Burns is 7th among edge rushers with a 27.7% pass rush win rate. Kayvon Thibodeau is 36th at 11.6%. I have a question about that for you. Dexter Lawrence is 18th among defensive tackles at 10.9%. And then he goes through the laundry list in week 3 specifically, where you had through 3 weeks, Dexter Lawrence in terms of QB hits, 5 for him and Kayvon Thibodeau, 4 for Micah McFadden, Pinnock, Brian Burns, Bobby Okereke, Azeez Ojulari, 2+ for them. And then, of course, the sack category has been spread out across this team. Oddly enough, it's Jason Pinnock out of the safety room with 3 to go along with Dexter Lawrence in the middle of that, which makes sense because he's been dominant week over week already to start this year, 3 as well. What jumps out to you inside of those numbers? Because I think Jason Pinnock's play and the way that Shane Bowen is using him, not necessarily a coverage safety, but a physical safety, I've liked that he's finding ways to use some of these pieces. We talk about versatility. It looks like he's one of the key beneficiaries early in the season from Bowen.
Yeah, I think that is interesting and noteworthy. Anytime a safety is leading your team in sacks, that's either super encouraging for the safety or really concerning for how the defensive and edge rushing room is performing. But I just go squarely to Brian Burns. I mean, it felt like the game got away from the Giants against the Minnesota Vikings in week 1. So you really didn't have him having the opportunity to go back there and pin his ears back and rush after the quarterback. You saw the pressures that the Giants were able to get against Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders, and that was encouraging. And then you see the Giants against the Cleveland Browns. Listen, you can't pick your opponent, right? You can't decide who has injuries and who doesn't. The good news is they looked awesome, and some of it was Deshaun Watson holds the ball for literally an hour every time he drops back to pass. So some of that is a little bit on them. Some of it is on the offensive line, but you take what you can get. I think Brian Burns overall in its totality, you said those numbers are for the season where he's in the top 10. That to me is extremely encouraging because as we've talked about a million times, Joe Shane looked at Shane Bowen and said, if I go get you Burns, you have to make everything else work. That meant that Burns had to be this impactful type player. And if he is a top 10 guy in sacks or pressures or rush rate or QB hits, that's exactly what the Giants need. And they're paying him to be that kind of guy.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting. Again, only 3 games. So some of these things are irrefutable, right? I mean, being that high ranking is obviously a positive for Brian Burns and for the Giants team overall. But it makes me curious about how will it look as you get 4, 5, 6 weeks down the line, because through 2 weeks, we were asking questions, right? Like, where are we here on this defensive unit? We have all this speed. We brought in Brian Burns. There is this weird part of me where is watching Kayvon Thibodeau with a somewhat critical eye and saying, Brian Burns is here so that your life gets a lot easier. 36th isn't bad. You have 2 edge rushers on every team. There's 32 teams. It means he's almost among the top 32, right? He's almost right there. I want him to be better. Like, I want him to be better. That's all there is to it. You brought in Brian Burns. You were a top 5 draft pick for the New York Football Giants. Like, I want you to be a more dominant player for this unit, because if you are, and this isn't even a knock on him, just to be clear, but if you are, then all of a sudden It is the dynamic, fast duo that we thought these two could be for this defensive unit. So it's something to keep an eye on here as we move forward. Now, we're going to go into a layer deeper when it comes to Dallas on our next episode, and then even on Thursday, as this will be a short week for the New York Football Giants. There are a couple of things, though, because we want to spin around the NFC here a little bit as well. It's just noteworthy that when we look right now, because you can go and look at rushing for the Dallas Cowboys, it's not great. They're having a hard time figuring that out for themselves on the offensive side. It's been one of those spots. The Giants have kind of struggled getting gashed at times. But you go look at this defensive unit, for the Dallas Cowboys. They've given up 372 yards per game, right? Now, they're only giving up 187 through the air, but that's also because they're giving up 185 on the ground. There is this element when we think forward to what could be for the New York Football Giants on the line. That is the league worst, by the way, rushing yards given up by the Dallas defense. And they're also giving up almost 30 points a game. That is tied or nearly, officially third worst in the NFL right now. The fact that the Dallas defense is bad right now is the thing that gets me optimistic about Thursday Night Football. The fact that the offensive line has played pretty darn well. The fact that Malik Nabers is statistically a top 7 or 8 wide receiver in the league already 3 games in. That's just a quick preview of what excites me about this matchup is they're bad defensively. They're not going to be able to do something in the second half of the game. They shouldn't be able to against Malik like Cleveland did. Malik Nabers should be able to run wild on that team all game long. The Giants just need to find the balance of punishing their biggest weakness, that rushing defensive attack, I should say.
You mentioned, Adam, the rushing attempts. They're getting run on all over the place. They're last in the league in rushing yards per game.
Yes.
They're also last in the league in rushing yards per attempt, right?
Yes.
So it's not even that they're just giving up a lot of yards. It's that every time people run the ball, they are getting big chunky plays. They're giving up 5.4 yards per carry, which is incredible to think about. Like, they cannot win football games if they are giving up over 5 yards a carry on the ground. It just leaves them susceptible because then all of a sudden they have to bring extra people into the box, and all of a sudden teams are throwing it over their head. And so, like, when you look at some of the defensive metrics, you mentioned them before. Look at the passing attempts. They're giving up the 4th most passing attempts. They're giving up the 2nd most completions because the Dallas can't make teams one-dimensional at all right now. And so, to your point, it is encouraging as we we'll dive more into Dallas, as a whole, but it is encouraging to see a team where you were like, oh, set it and forget it, 10 wins for sure. Now you're sitting here and saying they're 1-2 and the Giants might have a shot to put them at 1-3. And it doesn't look like they have any solutions in place to fix this defense right now.
Yeah, and again, this is actually one of those games where you might want a more dynamic or explosive running back because of how beatable that run defense is for Dallas. We already saw it in week 3. There might be a world where Tyrone Tracy Jr. is a guy to watch for some of these explosive plays. But to Andy's point, remember, Devin Singletary, it was a rough toe for a while, but he still broke off one big play for you. Hopefully the Giants can do some more of that when it comes to Thursday Night Football. But now, Andy, let's talk about the NFC overall, because this is where it's interesting. The New York Football Giants are 1-2. No debating it. There's no, if onlys and you could have had, and if only we knew what a kicker was and how to have one on our roster on game day. But when we go back and look at the fact that the Minnesota Vikings are a very strong team, that the Washington Commanders look like a very strong team right now, and you think about where the Giants are, Thursday night being more critical than anything, but then Seattle and at home for the Bengals, who are 0-3 right now, shockingly enough, it does make it interesting because the NFC is just such a weird, wide open landscape, mostly because of injuries. The Rams got the win against the 49ers, but they're decimated. The 49ers are also decimated, and it looks like Christian McCaffrey is off in Germany trying to salvage his leg. Like, there's just this world where I think there's a quiet frustration and a mild optimism that, maybe we can have more of a fun season ahead here if the Giants can come out and show something on Thursday night. And I don't know if a win qualifies the willingness to be encouraged by it, but it certainly would make a massive difference if you're 2-2 in what right now is, a landscape of the NFC that is open in different ways than we anticipated, I think.
Oh, listen, Adam, I mean, I'm not going to go full bore here, but what I will say is if the Giants can beat Dallas, who has had their number for the last, 7, 8, 10 years, the last decade, like, that has to be as encouraging as it gets, is to get a divisional win against a team that's been the cream of the crop in the NFC. But to your point about the overall NFC picture, Adam, just like everyone predicted going into the year, after 3 weeks, the leaders in each of the NFC divisions would be the Washington Commanders, the Seattle Seahawks, the Minnesota Vikings, and the New Orleans Saints, right? That's
That's
clearly
how I
what
had it.
everyone had on their bingo card, right? There was
Yeah.
no San Francisco 49ers, there was no Eagles, there was no Detroit Lions, right? Like clearly everyone had these teams. It does make it feel like some of these teams by injury, some by unfortunate circumstances or events, just haven't gotten off to a good start. And that could be troubling. I mean, when you look at the Rams, it's like they got their win, but are they going to be able to like consistently be out there with some of the backups that they have? Is Christian McCaffrey coming back for San Francisco? I look at this and I say, if the Giants can get to 2-2, and you look at the teams that are up above them right now, we talked about, the New Orleans Saints and others. It feels like you'd at least turn around and say the Giants have a chance to make some noise, especially given that teams like the Bengals and others are just not looking too good ahead on the schedule.
Yeah, we're take it with the spirit it's intended, right? Make some noise. I don't know. I had to spend the immediate reaction last night talking about how we can go ahead and stop bashing Daniel Jones because he threw an interceptable ball to Malik Neighbors that Malik Neighbors caught. Like, okay, he's played good football the last 2 weeks. Maybe he'll play bad football on Thursday night. We don't know. But as long as guys perform well and as long as the team wins a football game, then you have to be encouraged by it. And the other thing that I would point out, because you mentioned the Bengals there, is just noteworthy that if you go down the schedule too, watch when we talk about the Seattle Seahawks, who are 3-0 right now and on the Giants schedule, and we know it's never easy to have to go and make that trip across to the West Coast. But they're a 3-0 team who played the Broncos in week 1 with their rookie quarterback making his first start. They got that win. They played the Patriots and narrowly beat them by a field goal. Again, a team that we think is going to be closer to the bottom than the top when it's all said and done. And then the Miami Dolphins, who did not have Tua. So, you look at that schedule and you say that's a very daunting task to play an undefeated team. We'll go see how they play against the Detroit Lions, because the Detroit Lions are legitimate. They have played good teams to start this season. They are still 2-1 in spite of the fact of having that loss against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we think are a more difficult opponent. They played the Rams early when the injuries were just starting to set in. They also played the Cardinals, who are at least a dynamic offensive team. So there's going to be games, I think, to keep an eye on here. Obviously, all that matters is how do the Giants play against the Cowboys? Do they make this game interesting? We need not remind everyone that opening of the season last year was a 40-0 absolute bloodbath. So can you rewrite that script a little bit? And a lot of this may come down to what is CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott, and what do they accomplish against our susceptible secondary? And what does Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors and Brian Dable draw up to expose this weak defensive unit? Even though we know the run game is going to set the tone, I think dynamic playmaking is going to be key to success here.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Adam,
Yeah,
there
sure. Go ahead.
are there
Talk about
are
it.
a ton of really interesting matchups coming up, which is great for the Giants. If the Giants somehow find a way to beat the Cowboys on Thursday night, there are kind of barometer games. When you look at the Philadelphia Eagles going to Tampa Bay,
Yeah.
which one of those former playoff teams is going to, show that they are for real this year, and which one are you going to say, uh-oh, maybe they don't have it? You look at games like New Orleans versus Atlanta. Atlanta's kind of had a mixed bag a little bit with Kirk Cousins. The New Orleans Saints have looked better, albeit they lost the Eagles. Which of the teams, in that situation is going to say we're vying for the division? You got the
Yeah.
Rams versus Chicago. There's a ton of games that I look at on the schedule that I sit here and say they are going to tell us a lot about what this playoff picture is going to be. And funnily enough, the Giants are sitting squarely in that, if not to tell us a little bit about what the Giants' chances are, but also where Dallas stands too. Like from the Dallas perspective, if they can't beat the Giants, that's when you would sound the alarm. If you are Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, like you got to win this game. If they don't, they're 1-3 and they're searching for answers that they don't have on the defensive side of the ball. So it's intriguing all around. But yeah, Adam, this week feels like you're going to start really understanding what teams are for real and what's been kind of an aberration in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, and that's a part of whether, the shortened preseasons and the preseason games don't matter as much. So there really is an extension of things as you get into the year and you see where all these teams stand. But certainly there's been more of a shakeup, it looks like, at least early days around the NFL than we probably anticipated. We'll find out. We still have 2 more days, 2 more episodes. We'll have our game predictions. We'll do our fantasy plays. We'll do our bets of the week on Friday this week as we have our game reaction as well. But you know you get us on YouTube. You know you get us on the podcast feed. And we'll continue to dive deeper on how Big Blue gets the big win on Thursday night against Dallas at home. Coming up next time when we see you right back here. But until then, until the next time, until the best times, as Andrew Mackwitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.